Um, am I a crank here for pointing out the problems of divorce court? Getting married used to be simply what was expected and not considered one option among many back in the day. Clearly, it's evolved, it's changed. Used to be more about making alliances with other families than love, according to Bo Refik, which is why today's article, Why Marriage Survives, caught my interest. You can see here from the Atlantic, an illustration of a man pushing up a diamond ring like a boulder, of pushing that boulder up the hill. I think it was Sisyphus is from the mythological figure. Anyway, the article is written by Brad Wilcox. Before we see what he has to say about how marriage survives or how it's adapted to the modern world, be sure to give this video a like if you enjoy it. Comment what you think about how marriage has changed over the years and whether you would still consider getting married a good idea or not. I mean, there are definitely tax benefits, but I've seen enough videos about the divorce courts to know what I would choose. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for daily videos of cultural commentary from a man caught between generations. Let's just get into the article. There is zero statistical advantage to getting married if you are a man in America today, Andrew Tate argued in a viral 2022 video on why modern men don't want marriage. Women, he believes, are worthless anchors. They want you monogamous so that your testosterone level drops, he posted on X last fall, and your marriage is likely to end in ruin anyway. If you use your mind, if you use your head instead of your heart, and you look at the advantages of getting married, there are none. Drop a like if you appreciate my Andrew Tate impression. The loudest voice in the manosphere is infamous for many things, including criminal charges I can't read on YouTube that he's denied, but he is also notorious for launching a new front in the culture wars over marriage, aimed mostly at teenage boys and young men. Tate believes that men no longer receive the deference they deserve from women in marriage, and bear more risk in divorce. I'm not sure about the, what's the word he used? Deference in marriage, but there is the divorce risk. I'm not going to pretend that's not there. He argues that men should focus on getting strong, making lots of money, and using, but not investing themselves in, the opposite sex. His evident appeal, clips of Tate garner hundreds of millions of impressions on YouTube and TikTok, would seem to be yet one more sign that our oldest social institution is in trouble. Honestly, the only thing I really agree with here is the increased risk in divorce. Yes, men should focus on getting strong and making money, but we really need to. But where I disagree is instead of using the opposite sex, I think it's better to just say enjoy the company of a member of the opposite sex if she comes along, but don't make her the center of your world. That's just me, though. Critics on the left have been questioning the value of the institution for much longer, albeit from a different angle and with less venom than Tate. The realities of marriage in recent decades no doubt provide fuel for several varieties of criticism. Before divorce became widely permissible in the 1970s, Difficult marriages, and even dangerous ones for women, were by no means rare. Many women's career dreams were thwarted by the demands of marriage, and some still are today. Many men have been hit hard financially and sidelined from their children's lives by divorce. Innumerable children of divorce have had their faith in marriage extinguished by their parents' inability to get along, a pattern that may help explain Tate's animus toward the institution. His parents were divorced when he was a child. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. You grow up, you witness divorce firsthand, and you are essentially the victim of the decreased stability in life as a result of that. I don't really blame you. As for the difficult marriages it talked about, yeah, I hear that some of the divorces among the 50% divorce rate are really just marriages that shouldn't have happened in the first place because they weren't compatible or they were not on the same page about XYZ. That's what I'm going to say. If you are going to get married, make sure you are on the same page about XYZ. If you believe your kids should be homeschooled and cannot compromise on that, then either you have to have a partner who is on the same page as you with that, or you shouldn't be in a relationship with that person in the first place. I'm sorry, that sounds a little harsh, but there's really no other way to say it. At a certain point, there are some things you have to either be able to compromise on, be on the same page about, or you have to just go your separate ways because of irreconcilable differences, preferably before you enter the legal contract. Some of these dynamics are both a cause and a consequence of the great family revolution of the late 20th century, one in which divorce and single parenthood surged. The share of prime age adults, 25 to 55, who were married fell from 83% in 1960 to 57% in 2010, according to census data. And the share of children born to unmarried parents rose from 5 to 41%. I can only imagine where it is now, 15 years later. These trends have left Americans bearish about marriage. Until 2022, the share of prime age adults who were married was still on a long, slow, downward march. According to a 2023 Pew Research Center survey, a plurality of men and women were pessimistic about the institution of marriage and the family. Yeah, this sentiment keeps on coming up. Of course, objectively speaking, there are the divorce court problems to worry about. But other than that, most people see it today as just the tax arrangement. They don't really see the deeper spiritual meanings. And of course, there's the whole thing about it no longer being about the alliance between the families as it was back in the day. I'm curious to see how this article gets into how it's evolved to get away from that because I don't think people should be forced into marriages that they don't want to be in. I'm watching through the show C on Apple TV Plus, and I just got to the part where, mild spoilers for season 2, Magra entered an arranged marriage with some lord of the city that they made them set up the new Queen Cane, set up the new capital at. Go watch the show, it's adequate. it gets better along the way because I've already watched the first two seasons. I'm rewatching them and then getting to season 3. I will get back to you on that. The reports of marriage's demise are exaggerated. Rather quietly, the post-60s family revolution appears to have ended. Divorce is down, and the share of children in two-parent families is up. Marriage as a social institution is showing new strength, even among groups that drifted away from the institution in the 20th century, according to Black and working class Americans. And contrary to criticisms on the left and right, that's good news not only for America's kids, but also, on average, though not always, for married men and women today. My best guess for why divorce is down is probably because marriage is still down, and that the share of children being in two-parent families increasing is likely due to the fact that people are being more considerate of if and when they get married and to whom. They don't just rush into a wedding at the age of 19 or 22 or something like that. They get married closer to the end of their 20s, like my older cousin, or they, again, are very considerate about who they partner up with, which I think is fair. You know, marriage is a lifelong commitment, all things considered. May not really look that way in 2025 with no fault divorce and all that, but it is still generally considered a lifelong commitment. That, at least that's the ideal to strive towards. I think I've said in other videos that I really only endorse it in extreme situations, like Chuck Norris's parents in the 50s. For those of you who haven't read his autobiography, Chuck Norris had a alcoholic, abusive father who frequently walked out on them and then came back in a drunken rage. And then eventually, when Chuck's mom was pregnant with his younger brother Aaron, she finally divorced him because, well, he was everything I just described. So yeah, I endorse divorce in extreme situations like that. Frankly, I think that Chuck's mom should have divorced him a lot sooner. You let me know in the comments down below if what you think about where the line ought to be for divorce. Again, I use Chuck Norris's parents as a litmus test, if you will, or as a reference point for what I think should be grounds for divorce. If the ongoing revolution in family and gender arrangements is largely irreversible, the progressive family historian Stephanie Kuntz said in an address to the National Council on Family Relations in 2013, then we have to recognize divorced families, single parent families, and married couples. Families are all here to stay. Yeah, from a certain point of view, you opened Pandora's box. Frankly, I have nothing against any of these setups. And of course, some single parent families might be for reasons beyond their control. Okay, I think I'm about to get into some third rail topics here, so I'm just going to move on in the article. At the time of her talk, the divorce rate was about twice as high as it had been in 1960, though it had come down somewhat from its 1981 peak. Non-marital childbearing, meanwhile, had recently climbed to a record high, but even as Kuntz spoke, two important shifts in family dynamics were underway. First, the decline in the divorce rate was accelerating. Since the early 80s, the divorce rate has now fallen by almost 40%, and about half of that decline has happened in just the past 15 years. Unless otherwise noted, all figures in this article are the result of my analysis of national data. The idea that marriage will end in failure half the time or more, well entrenched in many American minds, is out of date. The proportion of first marriages expected to end in divorce has fallen to about 40% in recent years. Still pretty high, but I think you can still safely say almost half of it, or at least too high a percentage to take the risk for. As I learned in high school health class when it comes to contraception and such, there is no such thing as a 100% risk avoidance. Same thing with college statistics class. I learned that you always only go up to 95% because you leave 5% room for error for things beyond your control. But yeah, 40% still pretty high. Not something I would personally take the risk on. But hey, if you're getting married, you're an adult. What you do is your decision, and I respect your decision, even if it's not what I would do. Second, non-marital childbearing, after almost half a century of increase, stalled out in 2009 at 41%, ticking down to about 40% a few years later, where it has remained. For children, less divorce and a small decline in childbearing outside wedlock mean more stability. Quality over quantity because of the declining birth rate. Again, kind of like how more people are being more selective about who they marry, more people are being selective about if and how many kids they have. After falling for more than 40 years, beginning in the late 60s, the share of children living in married families bottomed out at 64% in 2012, before rising to 66% in 2024, according to the Census Bureau's current population survey. And the share of children raised in an intact married family for the duration of their childhood has climbed from a low point of 52% in 2014 to 54% in 2024. Probably a result of fewer marriages that shouldn't have happened in the first place not happening because, again, people are being a little more discreet and selective. A third shift may now be underway as well, although it is much less established than the first two. The rate of new marriages among prime age adults, which hit a nadir, what's that word mean? Lowest point in the fortunes of a person or organization. You could have just said a low point. Which hit a nadir during the pandemic, has risen in each of the 3 years of data since 2020. In 2023, the most recent year available, it was higher than in any year since 2008. At least some of this increase is a post-pandemic bounce. But the share of all prime age adults who are married has also leveled off in the past few years, which suggests that the decades-long decline in the proportion of Americans who are married may have reached its low point. Yeah, I was just about to say some of that uptick might be from weddings like my cousin's, which were delayed from 2020 to 2021 or later, most likely concentrate into 2021 because that's when they could actually do it. Some of these shifts are modest. Kuntz was surely right that couples and families in the US will continue to live in a variety of arrangements. In particular, caution is warranted as to the number of new marriages. It is quite possible that the longer trend toward fewer people marrying will reassert itself, but as a likely success story for those who do wed and as an anchor for American family life, marriages look like it's coming back. Stable marriage is the norm again, and the way that most people rear the rising generation. Before we look at the graphs, I just had a thought. How many of these are older couples getting married? Like one of my uncles getting married in his late 40s. There are quite a few situations like that out there. If not because of the actual love, then because of the tax benefits of marriage. Like, you're in your 40s or 50s, you're dating someone, you still see marriage as a good thing, you're not jaded about it like people in their 20s are today. You go for the tax breaks that come with it. Not to mention the wedding and the whole experience, and so on and so forth. Let me know in the comments down below if you think what percentage of this spike is older couples getting married, because why not? And then you have the number of new divorces. The 60s spikes up to the 80s, then it climbs down the 2000s, plateaus until 2010, and then goes down by 2023. And then the number of kids growing up in married two-parent homes sharply dips from 1970 to 2015, and then slightly rises from there. Continuing with the article, the Harvard anthropologist Joseph Heinrich has observed that marriage represents the keystone institution for most, though not all, societies and may be the most primeval of human institutions. On every continent and in every era, in more patriarchal societies and more egalitarian ones, it has governed family relationships. As an institution, it seems to build on the evolutionary psychology of both men and women, writes Nicholas Christakis, a sociologist at Yale, which is to exchange love for support. I think Ben Shapiro also once said something about how it was to know who the father of the children was, because, well, you can't exactly not know who the mother is unless you separate the baby right away, and then, of course, lack of DNA testing makes it impossible to figure that out. So basically, according to Ben Shapiro, monogamy in the, what is it, up until the 20th and 21st centuries was for the sake of knowing who the father of the children were. Today, we don't really need to worry about that as much because you can literally conduct paternity tests so easily. I mean, look at the movie Elf. Buddy the Elf was able to get that, the doctor that Jon Favreau played was able to get confirmed quickly that Walter was the father And going off of that, there's literally an entire daytime TV show dedicated to the drama around this kind of thing. And then the dramatic revelation, you are the father, or you are not the father. The institution's record contains no shortage of injustices. In many times and places, marriage has been bound up with the oppression of women. This article focuses mostly on heterosexual marriages because marriage was not legal for same sex couples until very recently. Still, given the long history of marriage's persistence, its recent resilience in the US should not be shocking, nor should the reasons for that resilience. As it has before, marriage in the US is adapting to changing circumstances and expectations. It is different now from the institution that looked so troubled in the late 1960s and the 70s. One notable example is family care. Most marriages in the US today are not throwbacks to the 50s when it comes to domestic responsibilities. Husbands are more willing to lean in. The amount of time that American fathers spend on childcare has increased from 2.5 hours a week in 1965 to 9 in 2024, according to Pew and the American Time Use Survey. Over this same period, the share of time spent on childcare by dads rose from 25 to 62% of what moms provided. Yeah, they were insisting on more of a equal split, not to mention arrangements like when I was a kid, how my dad would stay home in the morning and then my mom would come home in the afternoon, then they'd trade places. So I would try to guess arrangements like that are probably on the rise too. Indeed, one reason the United States' birth rate might be higher than those of East Asian countries such as Japan and South Korea, where the fertility rate has fallen to 1.15 and 0.75 babies per woman, respectively, well below the US rate of 1.6, is that men in those countries do much less childcare and household labor than men in the US. Even as women around the world embrace the egalitarian frontier, in the words of the social scientist Alice Evans, men in some cultures have maintained their old habits. As a result, Evans writes, the sexes drift apart. This may help explain why South Korea has seen marriages tank and its fertility rate fall to the lowest in the world. The manosphere is probably going to argue something about how women abandoned the traditional roles. Personally, I am not really in favor one way or the other. I mean, I'm not against the traditional roles. I'm just against forcing it on people. You know, I have nothing against women being a stay-at-home mom as long as it's what she decides she is willing to do. Whether she wants to do it or not is a different story. But if she's willing to do it and she's willing to commit to that, same thing for stay-at-home dads as well. If he's willing to commit to that, then by all means, I have nothing against that kind of setup. There is no single model for a good marriage in the US today, and most couples have their struggles. Men still do less childcare and housework, and disagreements over the division of household labor are a source of tension for some couples. Many women still value some traditional traits in men, such as breadwinning, and some men's unreliability as breadwinners is a source of strain for them and their wives. 2016 study on divorce published by the American Sociological Review found that when a husband was not employed full-time, his risk of divorce shot up by 33% the following year. When a wife was unemployed, her odds of divorce did not change. Employment difficulties among less educated men are a big reason marriage rates are lower among the working class than among college graduates. Yeah, because all the working class jobs got shipped overseas, and shows like Cobra Kai tend to portray blue collar work like that as something to be avoided or something demeaning or a terrible fate to meet with. I love Cobra Kai, but that is like my problem with this show is that it portrayed blue collar work as this horrible thing. No, it's a fulfilling thing. It's useful. We actually do need people who do that kind of work, at least until the machines are able to take over. As for men still doing less childcare and housework, honestly, it's exactly why I say what we really should have instead. We shouldn't keep score in these kinds of things. Matt Walsh said something about that, and he's right on the money with that. Rather than keeping score, okay, sometimes I'll do a little. Times one should do a little more of that if they're able to, and then the other one should do more of it if they're able to. There shouldn't be any kind of scorekeeping. Personally, another thing that I don't want to deal with in a relationship is forcing things to be 50-50 and such. Sometimes it's one person who does a little more. Later on, the other person does a little more. It's a back and forth. Kind of like when I went to Florida last December. My grandmother covered the cost of the food we bought at the supermarket, including a water bottle you may have seen me drink from me on this channel. And then a couple days later, I covered the cost of things for her and my grandfather. We didn't count out exactly how much of it was. We just covered it because we care. Honestly, as far as I'm concerned, relationships like that should not have scorecards. You can argue against that in the comments down below if you'd like. I think that kind of thing should, honestly, if I were somehow to start dating and then she started keeping a scorecard, even if it wasn't a literal card, I would simply break up with her and move on. But on the whole, marriage confers benefits to women and men alike. According to the 2024 General Social Survey, married men and women ages 25 to 55 are more than twice as likely to be very happy with their life as their non-married peers. Married people, men and women both, live longer, are more financially secure, and build more wealth than single Americans. Yeah, because they encourage slash nag you to go to the doctors to get something checked out. And then also because both of them are working and pooling their resources, yes, there is more wealth in there when all is said and done. In 2022, I worked with YouGov to survey some 2,000 married men and women, asking about their overall marital happiness and how they'd rate their spouse on a range of indicators. The happiest wives in the survey were those who gave their husbands good marks for fairness in the marriage, being attentive to them, providing, and being protective. That is, making them feel safe, physically and otherwise. Specifically, 81% of wives aged 55 or younger who gave their husbands high marks on at least three of these qualities were very happily married, compared with just 25% of wives who gave them high marks on two or fewer. And in part, because most wives were reasonably happy with the job their husband was doing on at least 3 out of 4 of these fronts, most wives were very happy with their husband, according to our survey. In fact, we found that more than 2/3 of wives in this age group, and husbands too, were very happy with their marriage overall. I'd like to know if the other spouse was able to know what was said, because if They're able to know, are you really going to admit dissatisfaction unless you're that dissatisfied? If you know that they will know. I believe it's important for teen boys and young men to hear the entirety of this message. Marriage changes men, but not in the nefarious ways Andrew Tate might think. Men work harder and find more success at work after they get married. They drink less as well. Um, I've never had a drink and I've never been married. You don't need marriage to encourage you to do this kind of thing. Yeah, it might give you a bit of a boost, but it's not like the end all be all. Of course, some could argue that it's a drain. I mean, watch American Beauty. I'm just going to leave it there for now. And marriage can channel noble characteristics and behavior that have classically been identified with masculinity. Protection, provision, ambition, stoicism. That's good for both men and women, and can help young men identify and work toward a model of pro-social masculinity that diverges from the one being peddled by the manosphere influencers such as Tate. Or you could take the best elements of both of those, like Andrew Tate saying to get strong and whatever other thing he said before using females earlier in the article, and then combine it with everything else the author here just said, the protection, provision, ambition, stoicism. Like, honestly, I think I've said it before on the channel, but I'm going to say it again. You should do these kind of things for you. Any relationship like this is a nice little bonus, the icing on the cake that is your life. And it's not the end of the world if it's not there. Marriage's comeback is good news for society. Children raised in two-parent homes are much more likely to graduate from college than those raised in other families, and less likely to be incarcerated. Kids who don't live with both of their married parents are far more likely to be depressed than those raised in intact families. After surveying the research on child well-being, the economist Melissa Kearney concluded that the evidence is clear, even if the punchline is uncomfortable. Children are more likely to thrive behaviorally and academically, and ultimately in the labor market and adult life, if they grow up with the advantages of a two-parent home. Her view reflects the mainstream academics' consensus on family structure in children today. But marriage's comeback is, of course, incomplete. Although the trend may be starting to reverse, the share of all Americans who get married has fallen significantly since the 60s, and there is abundant evidence that many young adults today are reluctant to marry, or are having trouble finding partners they want to marry. In particular, marriage has become more selective over time socioeconomically. The majority of college-educated Americans aged 25 to 55, 62% are married, versus a minority of less educated Americans, 49%, according to the 2023 American Community Survey. The bifurcation did not exist half a century ago, and is one reason marriages are more durable today. Money makes everything easier. Abnormal psychology teacher would wholeheartedly agree with that, but I have to disagree a little about. Now, I have no disagreements here. Being more selective over time socioeconomically makes sense both parties are because both parties have to work to be able to afford anything, assuming you don't bring your living expenses as rock bottom as possible, but that's a topic for another day. The plight of working class men in the labor force is worth underlining here. Among prime age men, The less educated are nearly twice as likely not to be employed full-time as those with a college degree. And as working-class men's connection to the labor force has frayed, so too has their connection to the ties that bind. If, as a society, we want more adults to see their way into a lasting and happy marriage, then we would do well to focus on helping these men find their way to good jobs first. Wow, did this author watch Gerbert Johnson's video about how working such jobs like this is only beneficial if you only worth it if you have a wife and kids to come home to? I think this I think this author watched Gerbert Johnson. But the idea that successful marriages are attainable only by certain groups today is misguided. Since 2012, divorce rates have been falling for working class Americans and black Americans too, and the share of kids being raised in married families for these two groups has stabilized. In fact, the proportion of black children being raised in a married parent family rose from 33% in 2012 to 39% in 2024. And across both class and racial lines, marriage is linked to greater happiness, household earnings, and wealth for women and men. In the past, American society has readily advocated for behaviors that can improve lives and reduce social problems. Campaigns against smoking and teen pregnancy are two examples. We should, at a minimum, strive to ensure that young people have an accurate understanding of marriage today, not one that's outdated, and certainly not one supplied by cranks and zealots. Um, am I a crank here for pointing out the problems of divorce court? We'll circle back to that. Marriage is not for everyone. Of course it isn't, but men and women who are flying solo, without a spouse, typically report their lives to be less meaningful and more lonely. The share of unmarried men ages 25 to 55 who say they are unhappy in the General Social Survey more than doubled from the late 90s to the 2020s. That fact alone highlights just how wrong Andrew Tate is about men and marriage. Or is it possible that marriage is still glorified out of habit, despite the fact that, again, there's too many risks with divorce court, in my opinion. And that's just how I roll. I mean, again, I'm not telling you not to get married. I'm just saying to be more like what I assume everyone here in this, everyone that is still getting married today must be doing based on this data and being more selective and making sure you're on the exact same page about values and such. Again, if both of you, if one of you wants to homeschool your kids and the other wants to just throw them into public school, that is not a good match. And again, me personally, if you are keeping a scorecard, I'm going to break up with you right away. End of discussion. And so, end of this video. I'm going to wrap it up here. You let me know in the comments down below what you think about all this. Do you think that the marriage rate is starting to rise a little bit because people are being more selective? Or do you think that the divorce rate's going down because marriages that shouldn't have happened aren't happening? Because again, we're being a little more selective. Do you also think that the rise might be due to older couples getting married for the first time? Well, remarried, very likely. Possibly. I don't know your individual situation. You just let me know in the comments what you think about all this. Give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for daily videos of cultural commentary from a man caught between generations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.